Hello, geeks, and welcome to a podcast that's shaken and stirred. This is the Geekcentric podcast. My name is Hudson, Kevin Hudson, and this is our spoiler-free review for Daniel Craig's fifth and final mission as James Bond, No Time to Die. Joining me today are my usual co-hosts, because unlike Bond girls, they're in far more than one episode. In fact, they're the guys who wish they were spies. One's a moonraker and a picture taker. It's Lawrence Justin Lawrence.
Good day.
Oh, and he's definitely not the man with the golden gun, because he's way too busy having fun. It's Shelton, Nathaniel Shelton.
I always enjoyed studying a new tongue.
Amazing. Gentlemen, how are we feeling? Hopefully nobody's weeping blood today.
No.
Kevin, I looked up top Bond quotes, and that was the number one.
It's got to be one of his best for sure.
Yeah, Brosnan.
I might sneak a few more in the podcast here. We'll just have to wait and see.
Very cool.
Now, let's get those PP7s cocked and locked and take a shot at reviewing the latest entry into the nearly 40-year-old film franchise. In No Time to Die, James Bond has left active service. His peace is short-lived when Felix Leiter, an old friend from the CIA, turns up asking for help, leading Bond onto the trail of a mysterious villain armed with dangerous new technology. The movie was written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, and Cary Joji Fukunaga, who also directed the picture. The movie stars Daniel Craig, Ana de Armas, Rami Malek, and Léa Seydoux, as well as a host of actors we've become familiar with over the last few entries into the iconic franchise. We've got no time to waste, guys, so let's dive right in and give our high-level thoughts on the movie.
I want to start off by saying, I haven't watched all the Bond movies. I grew up knowing who James Bond was, but I think the Daniel Craig movies are kind of the first sort of foray into them.
You're probably more familiar with the franchise through all the spoofs and everything that have come in that time.
100%. And so that's actually where a lot of my knowledge and sort of expectations for this movie actually came from. I think right after we left the movie, I was referencing, I'm like, did they do that in The Simpsons or something? But, I think just before we dive into this movie, I made sure that I watched number 1 and 4 of the Daniel Craig entries. So I did find that I did enjoy this one probably the most out of all of the Daniel Craig movies that I've seen, and I have seen all of them except for Quantum of Solace because you guys told me not to watch it. So I didn't, but it was interesting watching Casino Royale and then jumping right to Spectre before coming in to see this movie, because you see Bond and he's using a Sony Ericsson, and then just one movie later and he's got a modern LG phone or whatever. So that was a little jarring, but I spent a lot of the time getting acquainted with Daniel Craig's Bond, and I felt confused, intrigued, and entertained. And I guess what I'll say that I loved about No Time to Die is I wasn't confused, and I was very entertained. So I thought that this was probably my favorite of the entire Daniel Craig line, and it's just it's silly fun for the most part. I think that some of the storyline is a little bit nonsensical, which I know, Kevin, you kind of mentioned at the end. But again, that's what I want, because that's what I've experienced through all the parodies. So it's fine with me.
Right. Yeah. I think the biggest standout for me about this movie is that it really does close the story of the Daniel Craig Bond. And I think that that's much different. I think everything before was very, there's stories to them, but they are adventures of James Bond, if you will, right? They're very siloed into their own films and their own stories. So I think when they entered this whole, Daniel Craig, and as he was called when he was casted, the Blonde Bond, they really did try to stay more in a narrative formation. And I think they kind of lost their way a little bit, but thankfully they were able to get themselves back on track. That being said, I feel like Spectre did a good job of closing out that story, and I feel like this movie does just a great job of closing out Bond's character, right?
It's kind of like an epilogue.
Concluding
to Spectre, right?
Daniel Craig's sort of journey in this character, very, very, very well. I enjoyed it too, Nate. I think it's probably one of the better of the five. You can see in his acting and in the sort of performances that he's really he's leaning in hard, right? Like he knows this is it, right? It's almost like the most freeing, less rigid Daniel Craig Bond version that we've seen versus the other films leading up to this. So it was slightly refreshing.
Well, especially when he starts cracking jokes throughout the movie, you know? Like, I think there was some really great lines, you know, speaking of Bond lines, like, I thought there were some really great moments with that, and I thought that really helped to keep me engaged, because, again, I'm not the biggest of Bond fans, so to be able to laugh throughout with this, what actually is kind of one of the darker of the movies, I don't know, man. I dug it.
Yeah, this movie will definitely blow fans' minds, just because... as a huge Bond fan growing up, I mean, some of my fondest childhood memories as a collector were traveling to video stores in Canada and the United States trying to find these VHS tapes. And it took me years to get the whole collection together, and I just loved that journey. And the one thing that Bond never did with the different actors was in their own pockets. Sean Connery, Roger Moore, they never really evolved the character. It was always the same James Bond in each of those actors' movies, whereas this one, I think one of the brightest spots coming out of this Daniel Craig saga is that the character evolves. He grows, and it was so refreshing to see that from the character, especially because as he starts out, he was so Timothy Dalton. He was dark, he was gruff. The films were a little bit more bleak. There wasn't that kind of humor that had really sort of soured the franchise a bit with Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan, where they relied too much on that. But he also didn't have that debonair, that class that Sean Connery brought to the role. And by the end of these 5 films, Daniel Craig had almost all of those characteristics. The main character from each of the actors that had played Bond had sort of finally come out through Daniel Craig's Bond. And that's what makes the journey that he goes on, especially in this movie, and sort of how they wrap up that 5-movie sequence. It's such a strong character growth for the character, and that's not something we're familiar with from the franchise as a whole. So I think that's really what worked for me as a big Bond fan.
I think that, to your point, they did a great job at sort of concluding and wrapping it up with this 5th movie to really just close off that character.
Yeah, because, I mean, certainly when the Daniel Craig era started, Casino Royale was a remake of the first book by Ian Fleming, and it was the origin. We see him get his 00 status in the very first opening scene of that movie. By the end of the last few movies, he's an older Bond. He's complaining about his knee pain. He's been beat to hell in these 5 movies, and so it's almost more like a closed off, this would be Bond in a nutshell. Here's his adventure
over a period of
right?
time, right?
Yes. It's almost all the stages that you could imagine of the Bond character all in one.
But I mean, you talk about his character growing through the series. I think in this movie alone, I loved some of the additional characters that they brought in, and getting to see Madeline, throughout the film, I think was fantastic, because normally, we don't get to see the Bond girl carry over from movie to movie. So I was so stoked to kind of see that happen in this one.
Yeah, I also really liked how this movie felt like a very nod to the future of 007 and Bond moving forward, with the introduction of Lashana Lynch and, again, Ana de Armas were outstanding in this movie. And
she was so good.
And it was nice that this film didn't feel super, super on the shoulders of just Bond. There was a really great supporting cast that helped kind of flush out and really kind of pitch this idea of moving forward.
And I think it was so refreshing in this movie that he's got his love interest, obviously, Madeline from the previous film, but there are new female characters introduced in this movie that he has absolutely no romantic affiliation with. And that is so refreshing to see from a James Bond character. In every movie, every woman he meets, he sleeps with for 40 years. Yeah. And so in this one, he has, a circle of friends almost, or people, people just that he's working with towards a goal, not how to get them into the sack. And that was awesome.
Yeah, less chauvinistic. Yeah, that's for sure.
And again, that shows his growth, right?
Exactly.
And I think the Nomi character coming in, and, making all those quips about his age, I thought was so fantastic as well, just to kind of really hammer that home. And honestly, I would love if we got to see Paloma, Ana de Armas and Lashana Lynch like in their own movie. You know what I mean? Like get Paloma to be almost like the Felix Leiter character, right? For
I would
Nomi?
I would
I don't know.
watch her.
That'd be so
I would
cool.
watch her in her own movie. She is such a fun take on the
good.
spy character.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, she was amazing. She was probably my favorite, small part of the movie. Just to talk about in a nutshell.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's that little sort of pocket of something that felt very outside of the typical Bond, but it worked well because it balanced off of Craig's senior Bond, if you will, Commander Bond.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's obviously no news to anyone that like Lashana Lynch was dubbed the 007 of this movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was announced in the news well before this movie was released. And I think that's the way you move this forward is you start to detach 007 James Bond and understand that the number of the agent is the monarch of who the agent is. So that can be someone like Nomi, right? Or it could be a James Bond. So, when Craig went out bold and said, that, James Bond shouldn't be a female. And I think that is true. I do think that. I think it doesn't mean that 007 can't be female because the next 007 agent, as we've seen in this movie, can be a female.
Right. But then I think, too, what Daniel Craig was saying, when you get the character of Ana de Armas, the character she plays, it isn't a 00 agent. It isn't the next iteration of Bond, but it's a female character in this sort of action spy role that is her own character. And that's, I think, what Daniel Craig was trying to say, is you don't need to replace Bond with a female actress. You need to give female actors a character that can stand out and be their own. And they managed to do that in a short amount of time in this one.
So good.
Now, another thing that really stands out for me in the Daniel Craig era of Bond is that the Pierce Brosnan movies by the end were getting ridiculous and silly, and they were taking action. Obviously,
Spectacle.
You have to amp things up as you go, but it got so silly. And
It was
Daniel Craig
spectacle,
is
yeah.
never windsurfing down a giant tidal wave and facing a man created out of diamonds and stuff. The whole franchise
Really?
is grounded more in realism, particularly the action, and I feel that goes a long way to help you connect with the character as he's going through the constant ass kickings that he's taking. Particularly in this movie, the action was phenomenal.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's safe to say that Bourne Identity, or the Bourne movie style aesthetic of action, was a source of inspiration for some of these movies, especially with Quantum of Solace. I think we saw a lot of that too in Skyfall. Spectre, I think, did kind of push for the spectacle side. It was getting more on that action for the sake of action. But I agree. I think that the testament to Daniel Craig's commitment to obviously the character really shows in his ability to want to do these action sequences, right? Now he obviously got to a point where he can't do as much, but Quantum of Solace, he threw himself around, like he badgered himself up, like he was the one leaping from building to building, so again, commitment and care for that character to want to do justice to it. I think it shows through it in the action sequences as well.
Well, I think his biggest problem with Quantum was he put himself physically through all of that, and the payoff, the movie itself, didn't live up to that effort, and that must have been so frustrating for him. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just really quick to jump in, you mentioned spectacle. If you're listening to this, you need to watch this movie in IMAX. Find a way to safely get to an IMAX theater and be safe about it, but still, watching this movie in IMAX was so freaking incredible. Getting to see these action scenes, getting to see the cinematography done by Linus Sandgren was so well done. Just the way that it sort of, the camera moved and sort of hovered in certain areas, and sitting in the theater, it felt like the theater was moving. I know that's like a typical thing with an IMAX movie, but still, I think a huge aspect to me enjoying this movie so much was that I did see it in IMAX in comparison to seeing the other ones just in my home on my TV.
Yeah.
So I do think that if you're going to see this movie, you have to see it in IMAX because it does have spectacle from the cinematography standpoint, maybe even a little more than some of the action scenes.
I totally agree. And I think the one thing that really stood out, connecting back to what Kevin was saying about the action, that sort of one take scene that happens in it, and I'll if you're gonna go see this movie, you're definitely gonna enjoy it. It gave me similar vibes to Daredevil's hallway fight scene from Netflix. Cameras moving around quite a bit, and it doesn't cut. It is very much a very, very intense, visceral scene to experience, and I really enjoyed it. I think, again, they did some really bold takes, and it really does intensify the moment. So I think that it was well placed in this film at a very pivotal point that really just helped drive the plot forward. And that's another thing. Like, this was a long movie. I think this is the longest of the 5 Bonds.
2 hours 43 minutes. I was going to say, but like I was never bored. Like, I think in the other movies there were moments where I was like, and again, I wasn't in a theater in front of an IMAX screen, but I was looking down at my phone. I was kind of like distracted by things, and I was never at any point in time feeling like this is a lull.
Yeah, there's always
that great.
There's always that pre-third act dip, right? Like right before you get to the last little bit, there's like something has happened, and then everyone kind of slows down and regroups, and then boom, you get back into action mode, right?
This one kept coming through, and I mean, that was one of the fastest 2 hour and 43 minute movies I've ever seen in my life in terms of the pacing.
Loved it.
And then one more quick shout out for us 00 diehards out there. The nods to the James Bond franchise as a whole in this movie are so fantastic. It was so nice that they finally let Daniel Craig do some of the most iconic James Bond things that you can think of. Whereas they've always alluded to it in the previous 4 movies, but in this one he gets to do. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who really is just a huge fan of the franchise as a whole. But there are just moments scattered throughout this movie where you're like, finally he said this, or finally he got to do this, and it was so rewarding as a lifelong Bond fan to see those things.
Right, and especially in the series as he's been trying to figure those things out. You know, there's been those moments throughout the series where those Easter eggs that you're talking about, those Bond moments, were being figured out. And to get that sort of closure only puts another little layer of that, like tying up that bow on this story for Craig's Bond. So yeah, I thought that was a really nice touch to have that in there.
Yeah, it was very, very fitting. Now, no Bond movie is complete without a deliciously evil bad guy. So why don't we be villains ourselves and talk about a few of the things that maybe didn't work so well in the movie?
Well, it's funny that you brought up the bad guy. I think we all kind of walked out of this really feeling a little underwhelmed or whelmed by Rami Malek. I thought he was very creepy. I loved how without spoiling, I loved how they fit his character into the existing storyline. I thought was really smart, and having just come off of seeing Spectre the night before, the way they weaved that together, I was like, this is one movie for me right now. So I thought that was a really great choice, but I just don't know if he was he wasn't Christoph Waltz, I think, was the big thing for me.
Those are tough shoes to fill, right?
True,
but I think,
that's fair.
And I think it wasn't his fault. It was what he was given to work with. And I think one of the things that I really struggled with was trying to figure out the villain's motives and why he was doing the things he's doing. Bond villains are usually pretty simple. Here's my plan. This is how it's going to go. And then Bond finds a way to thwart it. In this one, the villain himself makes really questionable decisions. Bond films shouldn't make you have to think that hard about what was actually going on. And so I think that was sort of a downfall of, the worst aspect of the movie, in my opinion.
I mean, I did follow along with the movie a lot more than I did Spectre, but to your point, like his motivations, like what he wanted to do, what his end game was a little bit
it was foggy.
Not as
it was
clear.
foggy,
Yeah.
and I think I think that is unfortunately the negative to this film, is that it's not really the Bond villain to really go out with a bang on this series.
Right. You'd think you'd want to have like a matching villain.
Well, Blofeld would have been the better choice.
Would have been definitely a
right.
more
I appreciate
adversary.
Rami Malek, but I think I would have rather this story been centered around closing out that sort of dynamic between Bond and Blofeld, and
because he's so intrinsically tied to his past, right?
Yeah, especially given the fact that they are he was his adopted brother, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just feel like it was a better show. I love Rami Malek. I think he did a great job with what he was able to do. He was creepy.
Yeah.
He was definitely very Bond villain-esque, but I thought he was going to have a far more clearer intention of what he was actually wanting to achieve, and a little bit more, I guess, conniving. You know,
he did evil things, but then he had a chance to do another evil thing and didn't, and he was all over the map. Like, the character itself worked, his motivations and everything just weren't solidly defined, I don't think.
For sure. And he was making a lot of decisions that in the moment you were just kind of like, wait, why did he do that? Why did he just do that just now? That seems like against what he's trying to do. But I think overall, I think the writers had to make a decision with this movie. And I think at the end of the day, if we couldn't get an amazing villain and an amazing Bond, at least for this final Daniel Craig Bond, we got an amazing Bond. And I think that, to me, I'm fine with that, because I think the good news is if these movies aren't going away. This is a huge franchise for Sony. I don't think this is going to be this is our last Bond movie ever, so it's definitely not our last Bond villain ever. And I think they still have time to put a spotlight on a really cool villain.
Yeah, I think the rights actually switched to Universal now.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
even
so.
for
Yeah.
them, then.
I'm not
maybe
sure.
maybe
That
a new
Universal's
take
label.
entirely.
Yeah. Universal's label showed up, and I think that's part of the reason why this movie was so late in terms of release, apart from obviously COVID restraints, but was sort of the studio switchover.
Well, I guess Chris Pratt is going to be the new Bond then. I guess that's what it means, right?
An American Bond, that would be fairly interesting to see.
Ooh, that might be a big no. I don't know how that would go over.
No. Let him play Mario. That's already enough. Don't worry about it.
All right, well, diamonds are forever, but this podcast isn't. So let's get to our final scores. We're keeping it simple today and ranking the film out of 005.
Okay. So yeah, as I said, like, this was my favorite of the Daniel Craig Bond movies. I've enjoyed. I was entertained by the previous ones. Getting to see sort of an exploration of Bond as a character was really cool for me. I think I missed out as a viewer on a lot of the stuff that was probably callbacks to anything that wasn't parodied in The Simpsons or Family Guy.
Austin Powers, yeah.
Right, or Austin Powers. But I did get enough of it that I was still entertained. I do think that this, in my experience, was the clearest of the narratives. I think this was maybe not my favorite villain, but I don't think it was the worst villain either. I still think that probably fits within Quantum of Solace from what I'm hearing. So I'm excited to never watch that. But for this movie, I had so much fun, and yeah, the 2 hours and 43-minute runtime just flew by for me, and I want to watch it again. Honestly, it's the first time that I sort of have come right out of one of these Bond movies and been like, I want to watch that right now again, if only to see Ana de Armas again do that amazing choreography that she did. But yeah, for me, I really enjoyed this movie. It's fantastic. I'm giving it a 4.5. 00, so 4.5. Imagine being that person. It's like, what did I do wrong?
Justin, thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with you, Nate. I can't wait to see this movie again. I really enjoyed the closure to the story of Daniel Craig's Bond. Having watched all of the other ones leading up to this one, you really get a sense that, again, they really tried to push storytelling with Bond's character rather than just a simple adventure. They tried to create a thread and tie an emotional resonance to his character of why he becomes this agent that we've already seen in past movies. That's the nature of Bond, essentially. And I think Daniel Craig does a really good job of bringing that to the forefront and really highlighting that with his acting chops, and also investing so much into the action throughout all of these movies. And specifically with No Time to Die, this really does cap and put closure on his character. I was, again, whelmed by the villain. I think Rami Malek, while a great actor, and I think he's absolutely super talented, they didn't really use him properly. And I think realistically they should have, for the amount that Blofeld still played a part in this story, he should have just been the bad guy. So yeah, I feel like that is a bit of a misstep. But yeah, I would say that this is probably my second favorite of the Daniel Craig Bond movies, Casino Royale being the first. So yeah, for that reason, I am going to give it a 004.5 out of 5.
Beautiful. And, you know, for me going into this, I pretty much figured I had my pick locked. Just like you, Justin, I thought Casino Royale, that's going to be the legacy film, my favorite film of Daniel Craig's. And then even in this movie where you get a villain whose motivations aren't clear, a little underutilized or not properly utilized, again, just a weaker of the Bond villains in the entire franchise, really, I think it didn't matter. I think what this movie showed, if anything, it's that the focus really is Bond. And when you spend 5 movies that follow a single arc rather than just episode after episode that don't have any connection to each other, when you build that character and we can watch him grow, and he's not just formulaic stereotypes that you expect to see him do the same thing in every movie, but make different decisions based on how he's grown, it's so rewarding. And so that's what really helps this movie stand out. It's one of the top entries in the entire franchise for me because of what they did with the character. And I think that is so... It says a lot about how Daniel Craig made this role his own while also finally getting a chance to pay tribute to all the Bonds that have come before him. And so for me, I was really, really blown away with the character study that this film became, and I'm going to miss Daniel Craig in the role, having refreshed my, watching the movies leading up to this. It really does tell a beautiful, constructed story that weaves through his entire time as James Bond. And so for that, I'm going to give this a solid 004.7 out of 005 for the movie. Oh, anybody? Well, there you have it. Our spoiler-free review for No Time to Die. The movie is in theaters now. Thanks for tuning in wherever you listen to podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and give us 5 stars because we have a license to kill. And wouldn't you rather die another day? In addition, this podcast isn't for your ears only, so be sure to recommend the show to movie fans, geeks, anyone you know. We'd also love to know what you thought about the latest Bond adventure. What was your favorite Daniel Craig movie? And who is your favorite Bond actor? Let us know at wearegeekcentric@gmail.com. And in case you don't like to do things the old-fashioned way, you can also hit us up on Twitter at GeekcentricYT and on Instagram at wearegeekcentric. And remember, unlike Christmas, this podcast comes more than once a year. And we have plenty of awesome content to check out. Most notably, we have our final episode for this season of What If Watch Club out now. We also had the chance to recently talk with several of the amazing animators responsible for bringing that program to life, so keep your golden eye open for that one. Justin, Nate, for some people, the world is not enough, but just getting a chance to sit down and chat with you gents about the latest and greatest things going on in the world of pop culture and entertainment is more than enough for me. Everyone listening, you only live twice, so thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep it geeky.